Hi everyone, my name is Royston Noell. I'm a proud gay man and a proud Donaquith and Wagadaga man from Omapun in Badawild and Torres Islands.
Hey, I'm Karen Pack. I'm a queer Christian woman and I live here in Barramadigal land on Darug country with my wife Bronte.
Hi, I'm Anthony. I'm a 60-year-old gay man, very progressive Christian.
Hi, I'm Clare. I'm Christian and also bisexual.
Hello, my name is Emma, or M. Chandler. My pronouns are she, they, and I am a storyteller and theatre maker and trans woman and Christian.
Well, my name's Julie McCrossin, and I've thought of myself as a lesbian since I was about 13 or 14, and I'm 70 now, so it's a long life of gay activism.
I'm Marian. I'm a Uniting Church minister based in Tasmania.
Hello, my name is Sue Ann. I am currently located in England, originally from Malaysia, Southeast Asia. Spent my undergrad days in Melbourne, Australia, and came out as gay, as queer 2 years ago.
My name's David, Landis-Morse. I am a 60-year-old and I work in the Uniting Church. I've identified as different things over the years. When I was younger, I probably identified as gay. Then as I got older, I have used the word bisexual more. More recently, I've been thinking more in terms of identifying as bi-pan, which is bisexual / pansexual.
Yes, and yes. Many times, and for many years, I was either told two things, I think, mostly. A, that I'm not gay, I'm not lesbian, because God won't make the mistake of making me queer. You know, I just have some childhood issues I need to work through and I'll be healed, I'll be straight. Or B, I'll be told that if I choose the gay lifestyle, I will have no place in the church because I would be rejecting Jesus by not working hard enough to overcome what the church deemed to be sinful. So, I remember when I first told my church leaders about my relationship with another woman about 2 years ago now, that coming out day. I was asked by the leaders to give that up, to die to myself, to die to my sexuality, to give up the woman I love. Because they told me that to do that is a sacrificial act of discipleship. That was the term used. That was the way it was couched. It was an act of discipleship because my Christian faith and my sexuality.
In my teenage years, I was confronted with the information that the sexual feelings that I had for girls and later women were at that time utterly unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. So I don't feel I left the faith so much as that I was kicked out. And I stayed connected largely through religious programs on ABC radio and television, and then was able to rejoin in later life when particularly the Uniting Church in Australia was just so welcoming. But there's always been a subculture among even Catholic as well as Protestant faith groups where some people made you welcome.
In terms of choosing between my faith and being bisexual, I did definitely go through a lot of struggle with that in terms of the theology, I guess, and interpretation. I'm very privileged in that I never had to go through conversion therapy because when you're bisexual, you can hide under the radar a little bit. I did have my own sort of personal spiritual battle of wondering if God still accepted me.
Yeah, choosing between my faith and my sexuality probably has changed over the years. When I was younger, I grew up in a very fundamentalist church, and there would have been no opportunity to be openly queer within that framework. So for me, the story of my engagement with faith has probably changed as I've gotten older. One of the reasons when I was finally able to choose a church to go to was that I could choose the Uniting Church because I knew they had done a little bit of work in this area, specifically releasing a report on sexuality in, I think, the late 90s. And that allowed me to at least know that, in theory, entering into the Uniting Church would be a safe place for myself and my family to worship with.
I'm very lucky in some senses that I never had to directly choose. Like, it wasn't like I grew up in a congregation or a faith community or around other Christians who were actively being transphobic or homophobic. So it was never sort of any major super conflict as I've come more into my faith, my understanding of my faith, my gender identity and sexuality are intimately entwined with that. But there was a lot of confusion, like, where do I fit in? And is this someone that I'm all off isolated by myself, or actually to discover there's actually an awful lot of us, and lots of places can be affirming and are actively affirming.
Yeah, that was my life. Like, that was my life for the first nearly 40 years, really. So I'm like a fourth generation preacher. My parents and grandparents and great grandparents were all in the Salvation Army, actually, preachers and officers in the Salvation Army. And I thought that's what I was going to be when I grew up as well. I was going to be a Salvation Army officer. But I ended up actually becoming a high school teacher and a chaplain before becoming a pastor in the Pentecostal church and then a missionary. But that whole time, I didn't really see a lot of teaching about queer people or homosexuality in the church when I was growing up. But what I did hear was a very strong message that any kind of same-sex relationship, homosexuality is evil, and those people are not Christians. I always find it really challenging to describe what it's like to spend your life being deeply closeted to yourself, like not being able to admit to yourself the truth about who you are and who you love. And so, you know, as a good Christian kid, I did a lot of like journaling and quiet times as a kid, and my journal is just filled with me crying out to God saying, you have to fix me, I'm sick, without actually being able to name what the problem is. Because if I named that, then I might be that. And if I was that, then I wasn't a Christian. I didn't love Jesus. And I really did. I really loved Jesus. So yeah, I spent most of my life thinking that I had to choose. And because of that, being really quite dissociated, like denying this whole part of myself. And so I thought that if I admitted that I did love Bronte, if I admitted that I was a lesbian, that God would leave me, and that would be the end of everything I'd ever dreamed for my life, because all I wanted to do was teach the truth and love people well, you know?
Growing up, I grew up in a small Indigenous community in far north Queensland, in a uniting church. So it was very welcoming. You know, we just went to church and sung and did all kinds of things. It was an awesome time as a kid to go to church. And so growing up, we never really got taught about some of the bad things that are said about, you know, homosexuality in the Bible. So I actually didn't really know what exactly was in the Bible. The first time I kind of got the gist of that is when I grew up, and I went down south to Brisbane and you know, started really looking into what are the things that are in the Bible. I probably would have been about 18 by then, and yeah, I feel like that did kind of sway me away from the church a bit. I never had any bad experiences with anybody. Like, no one ever said anything bad to me as a gay Christian, you know what I mean? But just kind of seeing what's in the Bible and stuff like that, it really kind of had me really thinking. And I really did think, do I have to choose between my faiths? Like, are these things, you know, can you be gay and a Christian, you know?
But really, my whole universe was Catholic. I didn't know anyone who wasn't Catholic. I went to Catholic school. The social setting was all Catholic, where they're encapsulated in this belief system. And so there wasn't really a way of me visualizing how those two things would go together. I went from a really quite almost extreme religion. So that then when I felt like I couldn't be part of that, it was a real rejection, really. I had to rethink what kind of person I was going to be, really.
I have two stories. One in the denomination I grew up in, but not as a teenager growing up. This was in a working situation. I had to decide to keep the job that I had, or keep the lifestyle I had. And not my lifestyle was nothing fancy. It was just being, you know, a 25-year-old person. And I had to make a choice there. But you know, that's also a long time ago. the other story is much more recent. Again, a different denomination. I had been acting as the music director on a almost voluntary honorarium type of basis, and they were looking for somebody to appoint permanently. I was happy to take the quite poor wage because I liked the music. I wanted to, I was enjoying what I was doing, happy to do it, in a position to do it. But I wasn't given, the words to me were, is there anything in your life that you'd like to share that would prevent you doing this job? I chose to string them along a little bit, and when he eventually said what he was referring to, I politely told him to stuff the job and haven't set foot back into that building again.
Basically doing what Jesus did. Jesus always prioritized erring on the side of love rather than legalism.
Yeah, the question of how queer people can be better supported in the church, or no matter which denomination you are, I think often comes down to questions of recognition, of simply being acknowledged as being present. In many ways, it's the story of what most minorities might feel in a way. How can we be incorporated? How can we be accepted? And then ultimately the question of also how can we be celebrated in a way.
For me, I just want to be welcomed. I don't need you to be super performative, like, yes, it would be amazing to see, like, you showing up at different queer events and stuff like that, but just allowing me to be in those spaces is enough for me, and that's makes me feel accepted, you know what I mean? And yeah, I mean, my old pastors, I see them at like pride events, and doing all sorts of things like that, which is really awesome to see as well, and it just makes me feel so much more supported. But I think definitely, just letting us be ourselves in those spaces at church is very important.
Certainly, more recently, I have felt that there can be Christian communities that are normally affirming. They're welcoming. We welcome all, and they might have a welcome statement that says we welcome people of every gender identity and sexuality, and whether you're married or divorced or single, and all those sort of stuff. But that's sort of on the face of it where it stops, and it can be really hard, particularly for queer and trans people who are wanting to connect with groups of faith, to know whether that's because we're affirming in the way that some really evangelical and Pentecostal communities will be like, yes, we welcome everyone, but we love the sin and hate the sin, and so you're welcome, but being really openly and actively affirming, whether that's because you're going to have a pride flag or a pride flag and a trans flag somewhere around where your main worship area happens, or whether it's on the door where you're going to have an active statement somewhere, actively saying that you're welcoming queer and trans Christians, whether you've got pronouns on your name badge, which seems really small, and you might not think, well, it doesn't really matter. There's no queer and trans people in our community really at the moment. We already know them, but that's a really clear sign to me as a newcomer to go, oh, this is not going to be a whole conversation I have to bring up. You're sort of prepared for it.
When it comes to what churches can do, I'm actually living it at South Sydney Uniting Church. I am one of a whole cluster of rainbow people of every definition who attend regularly at South Sydney Uniting Church, and we're made completely welcome. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. Back in 2013, I was diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer. I was getting treated with chemo, and I'd always thought I'd wait to get married until it was possible in Australia. And I suddenly realised I may not live long enough. So I said to my partner, Melissa, if I survive this, will we go to New York and get married? And she said, yes, we will. So in 2014, surviving the cancer, we flew to New York and got married. And later in 2014, South Sydney Uniting Church hosted a blessing for our relationship, not a marriage. It wasn't legal in Australia till 2017, but it was a blessing. The church was packed, standing room only, and there was an immense joy in that room.
I think the use of the phrase "all are welcome" needs to be thought through more. It's easy to say, it's really hard to be, and giving some intentional thought and discussion and conversation in a congregation would be good, so that when that phrase is used, it's an intentional decision to use it, that it doesn't matter who walks through the door, that all are actually welcome.
in my mind, so many things that Christian communities can do for queer Christians, including, of course, trying to help more conservative, non-inclusive churches reconsider their position and stuff like that. But what's on my mind right now, given the polarized state of things at the moment, I think my hope is for churches, whatever the position, to be honest with that position. And what I mean by this is for Christian communities and churches, for example, that are affirming of LGBTQ folks, to make it loud and clear that they are affirming, so that we as queer Christians know where to find safe spaces to worship God and to be accepted as full members. You know, it would make life much easier for us if churches could be upfront from the start. So that's what I mean by that. You know, so we don't have the churches would claim on their websites or the front entrance of the door when you enter, there's usually some banner or signboard, you know, that reads all are welcome. But when they find out you're queer, you know, you're removed from leadership positions, you're told to repent from your sinful lifestyle, you know, you're kicked out from the church altogether. So the reality is that not all are welcome.
Yeah, I think that the best way for Christian communities to support queer people is to let them be who they are, and you know, to celebrate their loves, celebrate their lives, and celebrate their gifts. So you know, if you've got a queer Christian who's a brilliant worship leader, let them lead worship. If you've got someone who clearly has a gift for pastoral care, if you have someone who clearly has a gift for preaching or ministry, then nourish that and nurture that gift and develop them and let them be visible. I think that sometimes there are really well-meaning allies who consistently want to be the ones holding the microphone, pointing to how inclusive they are, maybe, if I can say that graciously. And I think it honestly, it's one of the best things that you can do is hand the microphone to a queer person of faith and let them express their faith in their own words, in their own way. There's a lot of well-meaning people who don't necessarily hear what they're saying the way that we hear it. You know, so I've had some really good friends, like one of my good friends when I came out to her, whose, you know, instinctive reaction was like, you know, well, it's not for me to judge, you know, we're all sinners. And, you know, I love you how you are, as you are. And I, you know, I see how much you love Jesus. But it's that instinctive, it's not for me to judge, we're all sinners. The obvious correlate of that is what you're doing is a sin. And I sin too, so, you know, I get it. But it totally, from that get-go, defines my love for Bronte, my marriage, who I am, as innately sinful. And that really hurts. Can we just
again? Something I'd really like to see is greater honesty and sophistication in church communication at the parish level, but also at the broader community level, about biblical interpretation. For years, we were told women could not be ordained, and some people still say that. And they based it on biblical interpretation. Well, the Uniting Church has changed that. And the Lutheran Church in Australia has recently, in 2025, changed that. And I don't doubt in my lifetime or my daughter's lifetime or my granddaughter and grandson's lifetime, other denominations will change. We know that biblical interpretation has changed all over the years, and it will change in relation to homosexuality. And I think there's a fundamental dishonesty in the failure for more progressive Christians to speak up and educate the parish and the public about biblical interpretation and its history, so that we can understand that the condemnations in the Old Testament can be read in a different way.
So still sometimes, even in a congregation as inclusive and progressive as the one I'm part of, still sometimes a feeling I get that I'm loved despite being queer, rather than being loved for it as something that brings you know, qualities and things to the congregation that is essential to them. So it's not just them being nice enough to love me despite my queerness, but actually, you know, the love I'm giving them is actually strengthening the whole show, basically. So that's part of it.
I think what things need to change within our world is probably moves on a little bit from that last response, that idea that the more open we are to people's gifts, the more open we are to different understandings, the richer we are.
What I would love us to change society is for us to care a little less about individuals. Like we should care about individuals, we should care about communities and supporting and welcoming and uplifting communities. But lots of discussion, particularly for trans people that we're seeing at the moment, is all, well, we need to sort of understand how trans people work. We need to really understand the medicine of how that works. So we need, why do you want to change your gender identity on your birth certificate? Like, and that's a very personal question, and there are big questions that can be asked about that, but really on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't really matter to most other people. So we should be able to just accept and access that both as communities and to just continue moving on. I'm very lucky that in Victoria, it's very easy for me to change my name and my gender marker on my birth certificate. That is not the case around lots of the country. Lots of the country, it is really, really complicated, let alone when you get internationally. And so, but maybe we can start talking and looking at why are these things important, how we categorize or not categorize people.
Look, when it comes to what I still want to see change in society and what we can do better, I have to be honest with you, as someone who started getting arrested in gay liberation demonstrations long before the so-called first Mardi Gras, I would have got arrested for the first time in about 1973, along with many others. I'm 70 now, and I was 18 when it all began. The amount of change I've seen in my lifetime is absolutely flabbergasting. It's positive beyond my wildest hopes. To be honest with you, it's really only the faith groups who've got to catch up as far as I'm concerned. And the Uniting Church in Australia, and there are progressive Jewish communities as well, are leading the way.
I think while the society is still a binary-based society, rich and poor, wealthy, unwealthy, whatever, that sort of thing, it's going to be really difficult to break down other barriers. It would be really good if they're nuanced, that there's a whole spectrum between rich and poor. You're not either all rich or all poor or all male or all female. There's a spectrum from one end to the other end. And it would be good if that spectrum is captured somehow in society, rather than there may still only be male and female genitalia, but within that there's a whole spectrum. And if we could break that down a bit and have it a bit more nuanced, have it a bit more talked about, it feels to me in some ways that we've gone backwards from where we used to be even 20 years ago, but even certainly historically, where gender and sexuality weren't really big issues. It was accepted that it wasn't a binary across society and in everything. It was never a binary. It was just what it was. It would be good to get back to that instead of where we are at the moment.
It really depends on which society you're talking about, whereabouts in the world. Obviously where I'm from, where I grew up, as a child, as a teenager, it's still very much a very sensitive, awkward topic, whether in the church or outside. So, well, first, I hope the queer communities there will continue to find courage, because I know queer communities in Southeast Asia are very small, often fairly sidelined by the government or policies. But I hope wherever the environment is that they would find courage and persist, and that would inspire just individuals to find the courage to come out. And I think it's very often when people know a person that the issue then becomes, personalized and humanized. So yeah, I think my hope is just for more people to find that courage, and then also for allies to speak for the queer community.
Yeah, what I would really love to see is quite political, actually. I would love to see churches surrender their right to discriminate. There are still too many churches and religious institutions that think that the way in which they guard their faith, safeguard their faith, is by putting up walls to ensure that the wrong people are kept out. And I just don't see that in the person of Jesus. I see Jesus as someone who is arms wide open, welcoming people and saying, come, all you who are weary. And I think there's too many churches and religious institutions who are all about, in order to protect our faith, we need to make sure that the queers can't get in. We need to make sure that people who don't think the way that we do, who don't believe the same way that we do, don't get in. And I'm not saying that, Christianity has to be so diluted that there's no concept of Christ anymore, that there's no, Christian faith. That's not what I'm saying. But there's a paradigm that was described in kind of the late 20th century by a scholar called Ruth Rouse, where she talks about this movement that happened in the early 20th century, where there's a sort of a split in the church. And she talks about churches choosing a path either of unity and fellowship or unity and truth. And unity as fellowship is churches that gathered around this idea that, all of us who believe in Jesus can just cooperate together to do good in the world and to see vulnerable people cared for and to see marginalized people brought towards the center, to love the last and the lost and the least, as they would say in the Salvation Army. Whereas unity and truth is, if you don't believe the same way I do, if you don't hold to the doctrines that I do in the way that I believe is acceptable, then I can't work with you and we can't cooperate. And
much as I love the Pride and Progress flag and the rainbows and everything else, earlier in my life, one of the really most powerful symbols of gay struggle was the pink triangle, and that's much stronger because that's what they put on, that's what gay guys got put in them before they were put in the ovens or the gas chambers. So it isn't just about love is love. It's actually about there are still people in the world there's still lots of us who think we're better off dead than gay, and then who take our own lives. And there are still people in the world who would happily put us in ovens, and that we need to have that conversation too. As horrible and difficult as it is, it isn't just about, okay, we can get married now and it's all marvelous and we can wave our flags. We don't think about the individualistic thing. I think is what needs to change, in that we have to see that if one of us is suffering, all of us do. I think it would be really good if we had a Bill of Rights, and it would just reinforce that it's not just about prohibiting particular activities, but about embracing every citizen in all of their qualities, rather than,
I suppose, celebrating this Pride Month is just the privilege of living in a country like Australia, where there is some level of acceptance compared to some countries in the world. With the marriage plebiscite and the majority of Australians voting yes to queer people being able to marry, as hard as it was going through that at the time, doing things that way makes it very difficult to reverse in Australia. And so we know we've got the majority backing that now, and that's I think that's a real privilege of being Australian. That's something to celebrate, but acknowledging at the same time that it was very, very difficult at the time. So
I'm celebrating two things, really. I'm celebrating despite the state of the world, which is far from great at the moment, particularly for trans people, in places that we would expect to be progressive, or at least liberal and affirming, the UK and the US in particular, and they are actively not. It is really, really dangerous, actually, at the moment. But despite that there are still people going about their lives and finding joy and love and hope and excitement, and are doing the work and are also resting and being able to share that, and that we are finding that there are allies that are doing that too. And so that is something to really celebrate, that there's an awful lot more work to do, and this is not something that we can rest our laurels on, but there's actually a lot of good stuff that is happening, even if the big stuff seems really, really scary. And personally, I'm celebrating because it's the first, not my first Pride Month. I've had many Pride Months before, but it's the first one that I've really felt settled as myself, and that I'm not just sort of, well, I guess I should. I mean, I'm proud, I guess, and not really knowing how to articulate it, but that I really am, that I have come into myself over the last 6 to 12 months, as a trans woman, as an autistic woman, as a Christian, as all these sort of things, and I get to celebrate and be all those things. Not that I'm doing a lot of partying because I'm busy, but it's very exciting to, at least in quiet ways, celebrate that.
Right. Thank you. I mean, is there anything else you'd love a chance to just say? Otherwise, we're kind of done. That was wonderful.
Say, Well, the thing a quote I always come back to from the Gospel of Thomas. It's the third saying from the Gospel of Thomas. It's my favorite in the entire world. Jesus said, "If your leaders say, 'Look, the kingdom of God is in heaven,' the birds will precede you. And if they say, 'Look, it is in the sea,' then the fish will precede you. The kingdom is within you and outside of you. When you are known, you will know that you are children of the living God. And when you are not known, you live in poverty, and you are that poverty."
Oh, thank you. That's beautiful. Yeah, I'm hoping to have a few affirming Bible quotes that will scatter through the video when we do the editing and things.
Excellent. Yeah.
So very practically, let me
Yes.
go to my notes. And I'll actually just
Celebrating for Pride Month the joy of being alive. I am a survivor of a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, and I don't take any day for granted. But most of all, I've lived long enough to see my stepdaughter marry a gorgeous man and have 2 children, and I'm a grandmother. And these young children have no idea that there's anything unusual about these 2 nanas that are in their life. My partner is the actual birth mother, and we've raised them in partnership with their dad, who also is very accepting. So I'm just celebrating that I can have a normal Australian suburban life for Pride Month with my family. I'm just so grateful.
Pride Month for me is it's an interesting one because pride has been such a loaded term, like more than the term queer. Like, as someone who grew up in evangelical Christianity, pride is a loaded term. Pride is bad. Pride is associated with hubris and arrogance, and pride comes before a fall, and all that kind of rubbish. But I'm also someone who grew up deeply, deeply ashamed of who I am and not able to voice that and not able to express that. So I experience Pride Month as the opposite of shame. Pride Month for me is a celebration that I don't have to live in the darkness. And that sense of, the end of Jesus' conversation with Nicodemus in John chapter 3. But at the end of that conversation, where he says that anyone who comes into the light can be seen for who they truly are. And there's this sense of not having to live in the darkness anymore, but coming into the light, and being seen as beautiful and glorious, not being seen as like, oh, look at that, that's ugly, that's bad, but being seen as, the phrasing is, it'll be clear that what has been done by God. And so for me, Pride Month is, hey, who I am is something that God has always intended, and my love for Bronte and the beauty that I see in my LGBTQI plus in queer friends is something that is part of the beauty of God. And so we celebrate that. We choose not to live in shame, because shame is really anti-Christ, and we choose to live in the beauty of who we've been made to be.
That's a funny question. I mean,
Very funny, very funny question. But I think for me, it's little things that, being aware that I refer to my wife, not my partner, or I wear the pride, I have non-binary shoelaces that I wear them, or I wear the rainbow cross that I have. Just little things that speak volumes to those that need to hear it. I remember in a previous placement, I had the little rainbow cross on, and I was meeting somebody from another organisation to talk about stuff, and what she's talked about for the first 10 minutes of that conversation was the fact that I was wearing the rainbow cross. That was a huge statement for her. I think it broke down a whole lot of barriers just because I was wearing that, and I think I should do that more than I do, and it is something I will do this month.
Celebrating that's good in your life.
Yeah. What am I celebrating this Pride Month? I'm just celebrating being able to be myself. I think I'm celebrating that every day, really. But I'm also this month, being able to just come up and show up as myself, because when I was in the closet back when I was in high school and stuff, it was tough, and I thought I would never be able to get out of that rut, you know what I mean? And I never thought I would see the end of the tunnel. So just just celebrating being myself and showing up as myself. It's so important because I used to really shrink myself down to what people felt comfortable a lot, which I know a lot of queer, gay people, LGBTQI people go through. And so yeah, I'm just so grateful that I'm able to just be my authentic self. And there's sometimes there's things where I'm still like on the journey of like trying to discover, okay, do I like this? I feel like I'm growing as well. It's a never-ending journey because, what if I like to wear this or what if I like to wear that? You know what I mean? It's trying to find yourself and who you are amongst all of the amazing colors and everything and the costumes as well. But yeah, it's such a fun time and I'm glad I get to do it with an amazing community on Pride Month.
I think this Pride Month, I am celebrating my own journey and the place I'm at now. 2 years ago, I secretly watched my first Pride parade from the side of the road. I was in fear that my friends would spot me there. And so much has happened in the last 2 years. And just last weekend, I marched publicly in that same Pride parade. This time I was in the parade, not just watching silently from the side. I was in the parade with my church and other Christians. We were wearing t-shirts that read Christians at Pride. We were waving flags and giving out gifts from the church to people around us to tell them they are accepted and loved unconditionally. So this Pride, I'm celebrating how far I've come. I'm also celebrating the church communities that have stood in solidarity with me, Christians who have celebrated me and affirmed me for who I am as a person.
You've probably seen this. There's been a quote floating around socials since the US election of Dan Savage, who talks about at the height of the AIDS crisis, we buried our friends in the morning, we protested in the afternoon, and then we danced all night. And the dance was important because it was the dance we were fighting for. And he goes on to say that it didn't look like we'd win then. We thought we were all going to die, basically, because there was no cure and, the political context was terrible. But we did. And it looks like we might not win this time, but we could. And so we should keep on fighting and keep on dancing. And as a man who was born into a really violently misogynist and anti-queer society in 1964, and who came of age right at the height of the AIDS crisis, I turned 21 in 1985, and at a time when New South Wales police, where I was living, were at least tacitly and sometimes actively contributing to hate crimes and killing gay men. I've lived long enough to be burying my friends who are dying of old age rather than of AIDS, and to have seen both marriage equality and now Trumpism and those sorts of things. So I'm kind of celebrating that I'm still here and that I'm still fighting and that I'm still dancing.